This story is titled, I Overheard My Girlfriend Doubting Our Love, Walked Out, and Rebuilt My Life from Scratch. Hey there, Reddit. It's been a whirlwind of emotions these past few weeks, and honestly, I don't even know what to do with myself anymore. My name's Matt. I'm 32 years old, and up until recently, I thought I had my life and my love life completely figured out. Spoiler alert, I didn't, not even close. For the past 2 years, I'd been dating Emily. To me, she was everything: smart, beautiful, funny, and, most importantly, she made me feel like I was the luckiest guy in the world. Or so I thought. The way we met still feels like something out of a cheesy Hallmark movie. It was at this Christmas party hosted by my high school buddy, Jake. Now, Jake and I go way back. He's one of those friends you can't help but admire. He's got this big, boisterous personality and always knows how to bring people together. Emily worked for Jake at his marketing firm, and that night, she was the life of the party. I still remember seeing her for the first time. She was standing by the Christmas tree, laughing with a group of people, holding one of those red plastic cups you see at every house party. Jake, being the social butterfly he is, dragged me over to meet her. I wasn't really in the mood for socializing. I just had a hell of a week at work, but Jake wouldn't take no for an answer. Matt, this is Emily, he said, grinning ear to ear. Emily, meet Matt. He's not as boring as he looks. I was caught off guard, but Emily just laughed and extended her hand. Hi, Matt. Don't worry. I won't hold your boring looks against you. We hit it off immediately. Emily had this way of making you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room. She laughed at my dumb jokes, asked about my hobbies, and seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. By the end of the night, I had her number and a grin on my face that I couldn't wipe off. It felt like one of those meant-to-be moments you only read about. A couple of weeks later, we went on our first date. I decided to keep it simple. Burgers at a little diner I loved, followed by a walk in the park. To my surprise, Emily was completely on board. No complaints about it being too low-key or casual. In fact, she seemed to love it. We spent hours talking about everything and nothing, our childhoods, favorite movies, dream vacations. By the time I dropped her off that night, I was hooked. Emily wasn't just another pretty face. She was someone I could see myself building a life with. Fast forward a few months, and we were officially a couple. Life felt like it was falling into place. I'd finally found someone who got me, who laughed at my jokes and didn't roll their eyes when I talked about my nerdy hobbies like hiking obscure trails or experimenting with home brewing. A year later, we took the next big step, moving in together. We found a cozy little house just outside the city, a place where we could split rent and start building our future. Emily even joked about how we were living in chapter 1 of our love story, and for a while, it really did feel like a love story. We settled into a comfortable routine, splitting chores and binging shows together on the weekends. I wasn't in a rush to propose. I've always been more of a let's enjoy the moment kind of guy, but the thought was definitely there. Emily felt like my person, my forever, or at least that's what I told myself. Looking back, there were red flags I ignored, starting with her younger sister, Chloe. Chloe and Emily couldn't have been more different. While Emily was warm and easygoing, Chloe was sharp and, frankly, a little cold. From the moment I met her, I could tell she didn't like me. It wasn't like she was outright rude, but she had this way of making comments that cut just deep enough to sting. Take, for instance, one of the first family dinners I attended. We were all sitting around the table when Chloe smirked and said, Wow, Emily, you really went for the low-maintenance look, huh? Everyone laughed it off, but it was clear she was taking a jab at me. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe she was just being protective of her sister. But the digs never stopped. If I mentioned something I was passionate about, like a recent hike Emily and I went on, Chloe would roll her eyes and say something like, Wow, how thrilling. I'm sure the trees were fascinating. It wasn't just the comments, though. Chloe had a habit of bringing up Emily's exes at the worst times. Once, she mentioned how Emily and her ex-boyfriend Mark had gone on this amazing trip to Cancun. That must have been such a fun time for you guys, she said, smiling sweetly at Emily. It felt like she was constantly trying to remind me that Emily could do better, that I wasn't good enough. I brought it up to Emily a few times, asking why Chloe seemed to have it out for me. She'd just laugh it off and say, That's just Chloe. She's like that with everyone. But it didn't feel that way. She was perfectly nice to everyone else, just not me. Still, I sucked it up for Emily's sake. I figured every family has its quirks, right? Despite Chloe's attitude, my relationship with Emily kept moving forward. This year, Jake was throwing another Christmas party, and it felt like the perfect place to propose. After all, it was where our story began. I spent weeks planning everything. Picked out the perfect ring, rehearsed what I'd say, even coordinated with Jake to make sure the moment would be special. The ring was a piece of art. It took me weeks to find something that felt just right. I wanted something that would take Emily's breath away, but also fit her personality. Simple, elegant, and timeless. I couldn't wait to see the look on her face when I got down on one knee. I imagined her eyes lighting up, the way her lips would curl into that shy smile she always gave when she was genuinely happy. I thought about how we'd tell the story to our future kids, how we'd laugh about the journey that brought us to that moment. But life has a funny way of pulling the rug out from under you. A month ago, life seemed as stable as ever. I was deep into planning the Christmas proposal. Every detail was falling into place, and I was convinced I was heading toward a picture-perfect future. But then, out of nowhere, everything started to unravel. It's like the universe was sitting on the sidelines waiting for the perfect moment to throw me off course. It all began with a fishing trip. The guys and I had been talking about it for weeks, and I was looking forward to a weekend off the grid. Our go-to spot was a quiet lake a few hours from the city, tucked away from the chaos of everyday life. It's the kind of place where you can just unwind. No cell service, no emails, no distractions. Just nature, a couple of coolers of beer, and good company. I needed this trip more than I realized. Between work stress, Chloe's constant jabs, and the pressure of planning the perfect proposal, I felt like I hadn't had a moment to breathe in ages. Emily wasn't thrilled about the trip, though. I could tell from the moment I mentioned it. "A whole weekend?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "What if something happens? What if I need you?" "You'll be fine, Em," I reassured her, trying to keep things light. "It's just 2 days. Besides, you've got Chloe if anything comes up, right?" Her expression softened slightly, but there was still a flicker of unease in her eyes. "Yeah, I guess," she murmured. But something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. Looking back now, I wonder if she was trying to tell me something, if she knew something I didn't. At the time, though, I brushed it off. I figured she was just being clingy, not wanting to spend the weekend alone. The weekend finally came, and I hit the road with the guys early Saturday morning. The trip was everything I needed and more. We spent the days fishing, laughing over old stories, and just soaking up the peace and quiet. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about work or wedding plans. I wasn't worrying about whether Chloe would take another jab at me during the next family dinner. It was just me, my friends, and the simplicity of the outdoors. By the time Sunday evening rolled around, I felt recharged. I pulled into the driveway late that night, expecting to find Emily asleep or maybe curled up on the couch with one of her favorite rom-coms. But as I stepped inside, something felt off. The living room light was on, and there was an empty wine glass on the coffee table. Emily wasn't in bed either. Instead, I found her sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. "Hey," I said, dropping my duffel bag by the door. "You didn't have to wait up." She looked up at me, her expression unreadable. "How was the trip?" she asked, her tone casual but distant. "It was good," I replied, forcing a smile. "Caught a few fish, told some terrible jokes. You know, the usual." "That's nice," she said, but her voice was flat. There was no warmth, no excitement. I asked if everything was okay, and she brushed it off, saying she was just tired. I didn't press her. I figured she'd had a long weekend too, and we'd talk more in the morning. But that uneasy feeling lingered. Over the next few days, things only got stranger. Emily seemed distracted, glued to her phone more than usual. She started going out for quick errands at odd hours, and when I asked her about it, she'd give vague answers. "Just needed to pick something up," she'd say, or "Chloe wanted to grab coffee." It didn't make sense. Chloe lived on the other side of town, and they weren't exactly the kind of sisters who dropped everything to hang out. Still, I wanted to trust her. I had to. This was Emily, the woman I was planning to marry. What else could I do? Then everything came crashing down. It was a Thursday evening. I'd come home early from work, planning to surprise Emily with dinner. I'd picked up her favorite Thai takeout and even stopped by the bakery she loved to grab those mini tarts she couldn't resist. As I walked up to the house, I heard voices coming from inside. Emily's along with someone else's, a man's. I froze, my hand hovering over the doorknob. "You're too much," Emily said, her laughter ringing out like a dagger to my chest. "He's so clueless. He has no idea." My stomach dropped. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My first instinct was to burst in and demand an explanation, but something held me back. Instead, I stood there, rooted to the spot, as the conversation continued. "I mean, he's sweet," Emily went on, her tone light and playful. "But he's just not exciting, you know? It's like he's trying so hard to be perfect, and it's suffocating. Sometimes I just need something different. The other person laughed, a low, smug chuckle that made my blood boil. Well, you've got options, he said. You're too good for him anyway. I couldn't listen anymore. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. I turned and walked away, leaving the takeout bag on the porch. I don't even remember getting into my car or driving off. All I know is that I ended up at Jake's place, my mind racing with questions I didn't want the answers to. Jake opened the door, his face lighting up when he saw me. Matt, what's up, man? He said, stepping aside to let me in. I couldn't even speak. I just walked past him, collapsed onto his couch, and stared at the floor. It's Emily, I finally managed to say. I think she's cheating on me. Jake's expression shifted immediately. What? Are you serious? What happened? I told him everything. The voices, the conversation, the gut-wrenching realization that the woman I thought I'd spend my life with might not be who I thought she was. Jake listened quietly, his brow furrowed in concern. When I finished, he placed a hand on my shoulder. Matt, he said, his voice steady. You need to talk to her, find out what's really going on. But I wasn't ready for that, not yet. I spent the night at Jake's, lying awake on his couch, staring at the ceiling. My mind replayed everything I'd heard, twisting and turning every word until they felt like knives stabbing deeper into my chest. I wanted answers, but I didn't know if I was ready to face them. What if the truth was even worse than what I already knew? What if everything I thought I had with Emily was a lie? The night I spent at Jake's was one of the longest in my life. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Emily's laughter echoing in my head, those cruel words she'd said as if they were some kind of joke. He's so clueless. It felt like my chest was caving in, suffocating under the weight of everything I thought I knew about us, about her. Jake did his best to be supportive. He's one of those friends who's always been good at saying the right thing when it matters most. But even he struggled to find the right words this time. He made coffee in the morning and just sat with me in silence for a while, letting me process in my own time. Finally, he broke the quiet. What's your plan, man? Are you going to talk to her? He asked, his voice gentle but probing. I stared into my coffee mug, watching the steam curl into the air like the chaos in my mind. I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. What's the point? If she's already checked out of the relationship, what good is talking going to do? You don't know for sure, Matt, Jake said carefully. I mean, yeah, it sounds bad, worse than bad, but you didn't see anything. You heard a conversation. Maybe there's more to it. More to it? I snapped, my frustration boiling over. She said I'm suffocating, that I'm not exciting enough. What the hell am I supposed to do with that? Jake held up his hands in defense. Look, I'm just saying, man, if you're going to end things, at least do it knowing the full story. Don't leave room for what-ifs. Trust me, you don't want to carry that with you. His words stuck with me as I drove home later that morning. I didn't know if I was ready to confront Emily, but Jake was right. I couldn't move on without answers. I needed to hear her side of the story, even if it hurt. Even if it confirmed my worst fears. When I walked into the house, Emily was in the kitchen, pouring herself a cup of coffee. She looked up as I stepped through the door, and for a moment, relief flickered across her face. But then she saw the look on mine, and her expression changed, confusion mixed with unease. Hey, she said, setting her mug down. Where were you? I was worried. Were you? I asked sharply, my voice colder than I intended. Her brow furrowed, and I saw her walls go up immediately. This wasn't going to be an easy conversation. What's that supposed to mean? She asked, crossing her arms. What's going on, Matt? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I came home early last night, I began, watching her carefully. Her face didn't give much away, but there was a flicker of something, fear maybe, in her eyes. I heard you talking to someone. Her eyes widened slightly, but she recovered quickly, forcing a laugh. Oh, that, she said, brushing it off. That was just Chloe. We were on the phone, catching up. Don't lie to me, Emily, I said, my voice firm. It wasn't Chloe. I know what I heard. She stared at me for a moment, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she sighed, running a hand through her hair. Okay, fine, she admitted. It wasn't Chloe, it was a friend, but you're blowing this way out of proportion, Matt. We were just talking, that's all. Just talking? I repeated, my anger bubbling to the surface. You said I was suffocating you, that you needed something different. Is that just talking? Emily hesitated, and for the first time, I saw real regret in her eyes. She took a step closer, her voice softening. Matt, I didn't mean it like that, she said. I was venting, okay? Everyone gets frustrated sometimes. It doesn't mean I don't love you. Do you? I asked, my voice cracking. Because it doesn't feel like it. Not after what I heard. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at her hands, twisting the ring I'd given her between her fingers. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know. Those three words hit me harder than anything else she could have said. I don't know. It was like everything we'd built together was crumbling beneath my feet. What does that mean, Emily? I demanded, my voice rising. You don't know if you love me? You don't know if you want to be with me? What are we even doing here? I don't know, Matt, she shouted back, her frustration spilling over. I don't know how I feel anymore. Things have been different lately. You've been so focused on work, on this picture-perfect future you're trying to create, and I feel like I'm just along for the ride. Like, I don't even have a say in my own life. I stared at her, stunned. What are you talking about? Everything I've been doing for us, for our future. But what if I don't want that future? She said, her voice breaking. What if I'm not ready to settle down? What if I need more time to figure out who I am before I commit to forever? Her words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong. But deep down, a part of me understood what she was saying. I just didn't want to admit it. I thought we were building something together, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I thought we were on the same page. So did I, she admitted, tears streaming down her face. But somewhere along the way, I started to feel trapped, like I was losing myself. I didn't know how to tell you. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other. The love I thought we shared now felt like a distant memory, replaced by a chasm of doubt and uncertainty. I wanted to reach out to her, to hold her, and tell her we could fix this. But deep down, I wasn't sure if that was true anymore. I need some time, she said finally, wiping her eyes, to figure things out, to figure out what I want. I nodded, even though my heart was breaking. Take all the time you need. And with that, I turned and walked out of the house. I didn't know where I was going or what the future held, but one thing was clear. My life would never be the same again. Walking out of that house felt like stepping into a void. The home we'd built together, the life we'd shared, it all felt meaningless now. I didn't have a plan or even a destination in mind. All I knew was that I couldn't be there anymore. I got into my car and just drove, letting the road take me wherever it wanted. The first place I ended up was a diner on the edge of town, one of those 24-hour spots with sticky booths and bottomless coffee. It was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers at the counter and an older waitress who looked like she'd seen it all. I ordered a coffee and sat there for what felt like hours, staring at my reflection in the window. I didn't even recognize the guy looking back at me. My phone buzzed at least 3 times while I sat there, but I ignored it. I didn't want to talk to anyone. Not Jake, not Emily, not even myself. All I wanted was silence, but my mind wouldn't give it to me. It kept replaying everything she'd said, every word like a shard of glass cutting deeper. I don't know. That's what haunted me the most. How could she not know? After everything we'd been through, after all the plans we'd made, how could she not know if she loved me? Eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and I checked my phone. The first message was from Jake. You okay? Call me if you need anything. The second was from my boss, reminding me about a meeting I was supposed to attend the next morning. And the third was from Emily. Where are you? I'm worried about you. Please come home so we can talk. I stared at her message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. What could I even say to her? That I was sitting in a greasy diner, questioning everything I thought I knew about us? That I didn't know if I could look at her without hearing those awful words she'd said? In the end, I put my phone down without responding. I wasn't ready to talk to her, not yet. By the time I left the diner, it was close to midnight. I found a cheap motel on the outskirts of town and checked in, paying in cash so there'd be no paper trail. The room was exactly what you'd expect. A bed with a lumpy mattress, a TV that only got 3 channels, and a lamp that flickered whenever I turned it on. It wasn't much, but it was enough. For now, the first night was the hardest. Lying there in that unfamiliar room, everything hit me at once. The weight of what I'd lost, the uncertainty of what came next, it was suffocating. I wanted to call Emily, to tell her I was sorry for whatever I'd done to make her feel this way, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. She needed space, and I needed to respect that. Over the next few days, I fell into a strange routine. I went to work during the day, doing my best to keep up appearances, and returned to the motel at night. I avoided calls from friends and family, not ready to explain why I wasn't at home. Jake checked in on me regularly, and while I appreciated it, I couldn't bring myself to lean on him too much. This was my mess, and I needed to deal with it. One night, about a week after I'd left, I finally broke. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, flipping aimlessly through TV channels, when I came across an old movie Emily and I had watched on one of our first dates. It was a cheesy rom-com, the kind she loved, and I pretended to tolerate. Seeing it again brought back a flood of memories. Her laugh, the way she'd nudge me when I made a sarcastic comment about the plot, the way she looked at me like I was the only person in the world who mattered. I couldn't hold it in anymore. The tears came fast and hard, and I didn't try to stop them. For the first time since I walked out of that house, I let myself feel everything. The grief, the anger, the confusion. It was like a dam had broken inside me, and all the emotions I'd been bottling up came rushing out at once. By the time I was done, I felt raw, like I'd been stripped down to nothing. That moment of vulnerability scared me, but it also brought clarity. I couldn't keep running from my pain, hiding in a motel room, and hoping it would all magically get better. If I wanted to move forward, I needed to face the reality of what had happened. The next morning, I made a decision. I called my boss and took a week off work. Then I packed my things and checked out of the motel. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew I needed to get out of town, away from all the reminders of what I'd lost. I needed time to clear my head and figure out what came next. Before I left, I sent Emily a text. It was short and to the point. "I'm taking some time away to think. I hope you're doing the same." She didn't respond right away, and I didn't expect her to. I wasn't even sure if I wanted her to. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about me, about figuring out who I was without her and what I wanted from my life. I hit the road with no destination in mind, just a vague sense of needing to get as far away as possible. I drove for hours, the miles rolling by like a blur. Eventually, I found myself in a small coastal town I'd never been to before. It was quiet, the kind of place where you could hear the waves crashing from just about anywhere. I found a little bed and breakfast near the beach and checked in, determined to make the most of my time there. Over the next few days, I started to feel a little more like myself. I spent my mornings walking along the shore, letting the salt air clear my head. I picked up a journal at a local bookstore and started writing down my thoughts, something I hadn't done in years. At first, it felt awkward, but soon the words started to flow. Writing became my way of processing everything, of making sense of the chaos in my mind. I also forced myself to reflect on my relationship with Emily, not just the good parts, but the cracks that had been there all along. I thought about the times I'd ignored her concerns, brushing them off as unimportant. I thought about the way I'd focused so much on building a future for us that I'd stopped paying attention to the present. And I thought about the ways she'd hurt me too. Her secrecy, her emotional distance, the way she'd confided in someone else instead of talking to me. It wasn't easy to face those truths, but it was necessary. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was starting to see the situation clearly. And while I didn't have all the answers yet, one thing was becoming certain. I couldn't go back to the way things were. Whether or not Emily and I had a future together, I needed to find myself again first. By the time I left the coastal town, something inside me had shifted. I wasn't fixed or completely healed, not by a long shot, but I felt more grounded, like I'd finally managed to claw my way out of the hole I'd been stuck in. The quiet mornings, the sound of waves crashing on the shore, and the simple act of writing my thoughts down in a journal had given me clarity. I still didn't have all the answers, but I no longer felt like I was drowning. For the first time in weeks, I could see a way forward. Returning to the city wasn't easy. Every corner of it held a memory of Emily, our favorite restaurant, the park where we'd spent lazy Sundays, even the grocery store where we'd argued over which brand of pasta sauce to buy. But I knew I couldn't let those memories hold me back. I had to keep moving. The first thing I did was move out of the house. Living there wasn't an option anymore. Every room was a reminder of the life we'd tried to build together, a life that was now just a collection of broken promises. I found a small studio apartment closer to work. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. The act of packing up my things and stepping into a new space felt like closing a chapter and opening a new one. Jake, ever the loyal friend, helped me with the move. He showed up with his truck and a stack of empty boxes, cracking jokes to keep the mood light as we loaded up my stuff. "Man, you've got way too many books," he said, struggling to carry a box marked living room. "Ever heard of a Kindle?" "Books have character," I shot back, smirking. "You wouldn't understand." "Yeah, well, your character is giving me back pain," he grumbled, dropping the box onto the truck bed. Despite his complaints, Jake stuck it out, hauling box after box up to my third-floor walk-up without a single word of protest. By the time we were done, both of us were drenched in sweat. but the apartment was starting to feel like home. Thanks, man, I said, handing him a cold beer once we'd finished. I don't know what I'd do without you. Jake waved me off, taking a long sip. What are friends for? Besides, I needed the workout. As we sat there, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, Jake turned to me with a serious expression. So, he said, how are you holding up? Really? I hesitated, not sure how to put it into words. Honestly, it's been hard, I admitted. But I think I'm getting there. This, moving out, starting over, it feels good. Like I can finally breathe again. Jake nodded, his face softening. Good, you deserve that, man. His support meant the world to me. For weeks, he'd been my rock. The one person who never hesitated to pick up the phone when I called or show up when I needed him. I didn't know how I'd repay him, but I silently vowed to try. The days that followed were a mix of highs and lows. Some mornings I woke up feeling like I could conquer the world. Other times, the weight of everything hit me all over again, and I found myself staring at the ceiling, unable to move. But little by little, I started to rebuild. I threw myself into work, taking on new projects and challenges to keep my mind occupied. I hit the gym for the first time in months, rediscovering how good it felt to push my body to its limits. I even reconnected with a few old friends, people I hadn't seen in years because I'd been so wrapped up in my relationship with Emily. Through it all, I kept journaling. It had started as a way to process my emotions, but it quickly became something more. Writing gave me a sense of control, a way to organize the chaos in my mind. I wrote about everything, my fears, my regrets, the things I wanted to do differently moving forward. The more I wrote, the more I began to understand myself. I realized how much of my identity I'd tied to my relationship with Emily, how I'd lost sight of who I was outside of us. A month after I moved into the apartment, Emily reached out again. Her text was simple. Can we meet? I think we need to talk. For a long time, I stared at the message, debating whether to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep moving forward without looking back. But another part of me, the part that still cared about her, despite everything, knew we couldn't leave things unresolved. I needed closure, even if it hurt. We agreed to meet at a small cafe near her work, one of those cozy places with mismatched furniture and too many potted plants. When I walked in, Emily was already there, sitting at a corner table with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She looked up as I approached, and for a moment I saw the Emily I'd fallen in love with, the one who laughed at my dumb jokes and made me feel like the luckiest guy in the world. Hey, she said softly, offering me a small smile. Hey, I replied, sliding into the seat across from her. For a moment, neither of us said anything, the silence stretching between us like a canyon. Then, finally, she broke it. Thanks for meeting me. Yeah, I said, my voice steady. I think we both needed this. We spent the next hour laying everything out on the table. She apologized for the way she'd hurt me, for not being honest about her feelings sooner. I told her about the pain I'd been carrying, the doubts and fears that had consumed me since that night. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was honest, and in the end, that's what we both needed. I don't know what the future holds, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But I hope we can find peace, no matter what happens. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Me too. When we parted ways, there were no promises of getting back together, no grand declarations of love. Just two people trying to find their way forward, separately, but with mutual respect. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined for us, but it felt right. Or at least as right as it could feel under the circumstances. After that conversation with Emily, something inside me shifted. It wasn't like a magic switch flipped, erasing all the pain and confusion I'd been carrying, but it felt like a door had closed, a necessary one. For the first time in months, I felt like I could focus on moving forward, unburdened by the weight of unfinished business. The days turned into weeks, and I threw myself into rebuilding my life. The small studio apartment I'd moved into, which had initially felt like little more than a crash pad, slowly became a home. I bought a secondhand bookshelf and filled it with my favorite novels. I hung some art on the walls, mostly landscapes that reminded me of the coastal town where I'd started to heal. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and I took pride in making it feel like my space. Work became another anchor for me. I started volunteering for extra projects, throwing myself into tasks that challenged me in new ways. For the first time in years, I felt excited about my career, like I was finally working towards something meaningful. My boss even took notice, pulling me aside after a big presentation to tell me how impressed he was with my dedication. You've really stepped up lately, he said, clapping me on the back. Keep this up, and I can see a promotion in your future. Hearing that was a boost I didn't realize I needed. For so long, I'd been measuring my worth in terms of my relationship with Emily. what I could provide, how I could make her happy. But now, I was learning to value myself on my own terms. Outside of work, I started exploring hobbies I'd neglected during my relationship. I dusted off my guitar, which had been sitting in the corner of my closet for years, and started playing again. At first, my fingers stumbled over the strings, but it didn't take long for the muscle memory to kick in. Playing music became a form of therapy for me, a way to express emotions I couldn't put into words. One day, while browsing a local community board, I saw a flyer for an open mic night at a nearby cafe. On a whim, I decided to sign up. The thought of performing in front of an audience was nerve-wracking, but it also felt exhilarating. When the night came, I stood on that small stage, my heart pounding in my chest, and played a cover of a song that had always meant something to me. The applause that followed wasn't overwhelming, but it was enough to remind me that I still had something to offer. I also started reconnecting with old friends, people I hadn't seen in years because I'd been so focused on building a future with Emily. One of those friends was Sarah, a former coworker who'd moved to a neighboring city a while back. We'd always gotten along well, and when she reached out to grab lunch one day, I figured, why not? Sitting across from her at a little Italian place downtown, I realized how much I'd missed having easy, natural conversations. We talked about everything: work, mutual friends, even the embarrassing moments from our old office days that still made us laugh. "You seem lighter," Sarah said at one point, giving me a curious look. "Like you're finally coming up for air." I smiled, though it felt bittersweet. "That's one way to put it. It's been a rough few months, but I think I'm starting to figure things out." "Well, whatever you're doing, keep it up," she said with a grin. "It looks good on you." That conversation stuck with me long after the lunch ended. It was a reminder that healing wasn't just about leaving the past behind. It was about rediscovering the parts of myself that I'd lost along the way. As I continued to rebuild, I found myself thinking less and less about Emily. It wasn't that I didn't care about her anymore. I did. But the sharp edges of our breakup had softened, replaced by a quiet acceptance that we were on different paths now. I hoped she was finding her own way, just as I was finding mine. One evening, while journaling, I came across a quote I'd scribbled down during my time at the coast. "The only way out is through." At the time, it had felt like little more than a cliche, something I wrote down because it sounded profound. But now, sitting in my cozy little apartment, with music playing softly in the background and the scent of dinner wafting from the kitchen, it hit me differently. I'd been through the fire, and while I wasn't completely unscathed, I'd come out stronger on the other side. Months passed, and life slowly found a new rhythm. The pain of losing Emily no longer felt like a raw wound, more like a faded scar. It was still there, a reminder of what I'd been through, but it no longer defined me. I had grown in ways I never imagined, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. Work was thriving. True to my boss's word, I was promoted to a team lead position, a step that came with more responsibilities but also more opportunities to prove myself. I poured my energy into the role, balancing leadership with creativity in ways that felt fulfilling. The sense of accomplishment I got from my work wasn't something I'd experienced in a long time, and it reminded me of the person I used to be before everything fell apart. My personal life also began to bloom in unexpected ways. I joined a local hiking group, partly as a way to stay active and partly because I missed the connection to nature that I'd rediscovered during my time on the coast. The group was a mix of people from all walks of life: college students, retirees, families, but there was one person who stood out, a woman named Rachel. Rachel had this infectious energy, the kind of enthusiasm that made everyone around her feel more alive. She was quick with a joke, and even quicker to lend a hand when someone stumbled on the trail. Over time, we started talking more during our hikes, and I found myself drawn to her positivity and warmth. One evening, after a particularly challenging trek, we all gathered around a campfire to share stories and snacks. Rachel sat next to me, her cheeks flushed from the cool night air, and we ended up talking long after the others had gone to bed. She told me about her love for photography and how she dreamed of traveling the world to capture its beauty. I shared my own dreams, ones I hadn't spoken out loud in years, and for the first time, I felt truly seen. It wasn't long before we started seeing each other outside of the hiking group. At first, it was casual, grabbing coffee, exploring local trails. But as the weeks went on, our connection deepened. Rachel wasn't just someone I enjoyed spending time with. She was someone who made me believe in the possibility of love again. It scared me at first, the idea of opening myself up to someone new, but Rachel had a way of making me feel safe, like it was okay to take the risk. One night, as we walked along the waterfront, she turned to me and asked, "Do you ever think about the past? Like, does it ever hold you back?" Her question caught me off guard, but I answered honestly. I used to, I admitted. For a long time, I let it weigh me down, but I think I've learned to let it go, or at least to not let it define me anymore. Rachel smiled, slipping her hand into mine. That's brave, she said. I think a lot of people get stuck in the past. It's hard to move forward when you're carrying all that weight. Her words stayed with me as we continued walking, the sound of the waves lapping against the shore providing a soothing backdrop. I realized then how far I'd come, not just in terms of healing, but in my ability to embrace the unknown. Rachel wasn't Emily, and this relationship wasn't some attempt to replace what I'd lost. It was something new, something that felt like it could be the start of a beautiful chapter. A few weeks later, I received a message from Emily. It was unexpected, her name popping up on my screen like a ghost from the past. She kept it brief, saying she'd heard about my promotion and wanted to congratulate me. She also mentioned that she'd started seeing someone new and hoped I was doing well. Reading her message stirred something inside me. Not pain or anger, but a bittersweet kind of relief. I was happy for her, genuinely. We'd both found our own paths, and while those paths had diverged, I no longer felt the need to look back. I sent her a polite reply, wishing her all the best, and then deleted the conversation. It felt like closing the final door on that chapter of my life. As the seasons changed, so did I. The man who had walked out of that house months ago, broken, confused, and unsure of his place in the world, was gone. In his place was someone stronger, someone who had learned to stand on his own 2 feet and embrace the unpredictability of life. I wasn't the same person I'd been with Emily, and I was okay with that. In fact, I was grateful for it. Rachel and I continued to grow closer, and while I didn't know what the future held for us, I was excited to find out. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be, moving forward, one step at a time, with hope in my heart and a clear view of the road ahead.